Millionaire visits his wife's grave and finds a little girl. The secret he learns changes his life. If you liked this story, subscribe to the channel and type "love" in the comments. And don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. Great news awaits you. The morning mist clung to the marble headstones like ghostly fingers refusing to let go, much like the grief that wrapped around James Morrison's heart every single day for the past 3 years. At 37, he had everything money could buy: a tech empire worth billions, mansions across 3 continents, and enough influence to change industries with a phone call. Yet here he stood, clutching wilted roses in his trembling hands, talking to a cold granite stone that bore his wife's name: Victoria Morrison, beloved wife, 1984-2021. "I closed the Henderson deal yesterday, Vic," he whispered, his voice breaking in the autumn silence. "You would have been so proud. Remember how you used to say I was too ruthless? Well, I made sure their employees kept their jobs, just like you would have wanted." The wind carried his words away, leaving only the sound of his ragged breathing and the distant hum of the city beyond the cemetery gates. James had built Morrison Technologies from a college dorm room into a global powerhouse, but success felt hollow without Victoria's bright laugh echoing through their penthouse. She had been his anchor, his conscience, the one person who could make him smile even during the most brutal business battles. When cancer stole her away after an 18-month fight, it left him wondering if all his billions meant anything at all. The familiar routine brought him strange comfort. Every Tuesday and Friday morning before the world woke up, he would drive his Bentley through the wrought iron gates of Evergreen Cemetery. The security guards had long stopped checking his ID, simply nodding respectfully as he passed. Today felt different somehow, heavier, as if the October air itself carried a message he wasn't ready to receive. Victoria had been everything to him: brilliant, compassionate, fiercely independent, and unafraid to challenge his worst instincts. She'd started as his business partner, the woman whose innovative software solutions had revolutionized their entire industry. But somewhere between late-night strategy sessions and shared Chinese takeout in their startup office, partnership had bloomed into something deeper. Their wedding had been the happiest day of his life, surrounded by friends who'd watched their love story unfold over years of shared dreams and mutual respect. The cancer diagnosis had come without warning during their 7th year of marriage. One day Victoria was debugging code and planning their anniversary trip to Italy. The next, she was sitting in an oncologist's office receiving a death sentence disguised as a treatment plan. James had thrown money at the problem: the best doctors, experimental treatments, clinical trials in Switzerland and Germany. Nothing had worked. The disease that had no respect for wealth or influence had taken the only person who truly mattered to him. As he knelt to replace the old flowers with fresh ones, a sound pierced the morning stillness that made his blood freeze. Sobbing, not the quiet weeping of grief, but the desperate, heartbroken crying of a child. James looked up from Victoria's grave, his business instincts sharpening despite his emotional state. No child should be alone in a cemetery at dawn. Following the sound past rows of weathered monuments, he discovered something that would haunt him forever. There, hunched against a simple concrete headstone, sat a little girl who couldn't have been more than 6 years old. Her clothes were clean but clearly second-hand: a faded blue dress that had seen too many washings, and worn sneakers held together with careful stitches. But it wasn't her poverty that stopped James in his tracks. It was her face. Golden hair fell in soft waves around features that were achingly familiar: the delicate bone structure, the upturned nose, and most startling of all, those unmistakable emerald green eyes that had looked at him with love every morning for 8 years of marriage. This child looked exactly like Victoria had as a little girl, based on the childhood photos his wife had treasured. The resemblance was so striking it felt like seeing a ghost, like the universe playing a cruel trick on his already shattered heart. "Hey there," James said softly, not wanting to frighten her. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" The little girl looked up, tears streaming down cheeks that could have been carved from the same template as his beloved wife's. When she spoke, even her voice carried that same musical quality that had first attracted him to Victoria at a charity gala 12 years ago. A voice that could command attention in boardrooms and whisper comfort in the darkest moments. "I'm sorry, mister. I didn't mean to be loud. Mama says I should always be quiet in the cemetery because people are sleeping here. She clutched a small bouquet of dandelions, the kind of flowers children pick from roadside weeds because they can't afford real ones. The innocence of the gesture, the way she'd tried to bring something beautiful to honor the dead despite having so little, made James's chest tighten with emotion. James felt his heart constrict as he took in the full picture. This beautiful child, clearly struggling financially, trying to maintain dignity and respect even in her grief. "What's your name, honey?" "Mia," she whispered, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "Mia Thompson. I come here to talk to Mama Charlotte. She died last spring, but Mama Sarah says she's watching over us now." Her voice carried the matter-of-fact acceptance that children often had about death, but underneath it, James could hear the profound sadness of a little girl who'd lost too much too young. The name Charlotte hit James like a physical blow. Victoria had mentioned having a sister named Charlotte once, years ago, during their second year of marriage. They'd been lying in bed on a lazy Sunday morning when Victoria had received a call from a number she didn't recognize. She'd stared at the phone for a long moment before declining the call and turning it face down on the nightstand. When James had asked about it, she'd said simply, "My sister Charlotte, we don't talk anymore." But she'd always changed the subject quickly whenever he asked about her family, claiming they were estranged and that some things were too painful to discuss. He'd respected her privacy, focusing instead on building their future together. Victoria had carried that sadness with her throughout their marriage, a shadow that would cross her face whenever family was mentioned, a wound that had never quite healed. She'd thrown herself into their relationship and their business with the intensity of someone trying to fill a void, and James had loved her enough to never push for details about the past she'd chosen to leave behind. But now, looking at this child who was Victoria's mirror image, questions flooded his mind like a dam bursting. "Mia, where's your Mama Sarah now?" he asked gently, crouching down to her eye level. Fresh tears spilled over, and Mia's small body shook with the force of her emotion. "She's really sick. The doctors say she needs an operation, but we don't have enough money. I've been selling my treasures, but it's not enough." She opened her small fist to reveal a tarnished silver ring with a tiny chip of green glass that might have once passed for an emerald. This was Mama Charlotte's. "It's all I have left of her, but if I can sell it, maybe it will help save Mama Sarah." The sight of this 6-year-old child trying to sacrifice her most precious possession to save her mother shattered something inside James that had been carefully protected since Victoria's death. Here was innocent love in its purest form, untainted by the corporate machinations and calculated moves that defined his daily existence. This little girl was willing to give up the last tangible connection to her deceased mother, if it meant saving the woman who'd stepped up to care for her. The ring itself told a story. Clearly costume jewelry, probably worth less than $20, but polished to a shine by small hands that treated it like the most valuable treasure in the world. The care with which Mia held it, the way she looked at it with both love and desperation, spoke to a maturity no child should possess. "How much do you need for your mama's operation?" he heard himself asking. Mia's eyes widened with hope that was almost painful to witness. The hospital man said $50,000. "I know it's a lot, but I was hoping. Maybe if I sold this ring and found some other things." Her voice trailed off as reality crashed back down on her small shoulders. The impossibility of a 6-year-old raising such an astronomical sum was heartbreaking in its futility. $50,000. James spent more than that on wine at business dinners. He could write a check right now and solve this child's entire world, but something held him back. The resemblance to Victoria was too strong to be coincidental, and the mention of Charlotte had opened old wounds he thought had healed. His business instincts, honed by years of navigating complex deals and avoiding sophisticated scams, made him pause. In his world, coincidences this profound usually weren't coincidences at all. "Mia, can you tell me more about your Mama Charlotte? What was her last name before she got sick?" The little girl tilted her head, considering the question with the seriousness of someone much older. "Mama Sarah says her name was Charlotte Reynolds. She used to tell me stories about her baby sister Victoria, who was really smart and married someone important. But Mama Charlotte got sick when I was 4 and she died when I was 5. The innocent words hit James like a sledgehammer to the chest. Reynolds, Victoria's maiden name. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as the implications crashed over him. Charlotte Reynolds would have been Victoria's sister, the sister she'd mentioned only once, the family she'd claimed was lost to her. Which meant this child, this living, breathing reminder of his wife, was family. Victoria's niece. The niece he'd never known existed. Standing in that cemetery with the morning sun finally breaking through the mist, James Morrison realized his carefully ordered world was about to change forever. The question was, what was he going to do about it? His wealth could solve Mia's immediate crisis with the stroke of a pen. But the emotional complexity of the situation was staggering. This was Victoria's flesh and blood, abandoned to poverty while he'd lived in isolated luxury, drowning in grief and guilt. The tragedy was almost overwhelming. Two sisters who'd loved each other but had been separated by pride and circumstances, both dying without reconciliation, leaving behind a child who was now the bridge between their two worlds. James felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a mantle he'd never asked for but couldn't refuse. "Mia, I need you to listen to me very carefully," James said, his voice steady despite the emotional earthquake happening inside his chest. "I think I might have known your Mama Charlotte's sister. Can you tell me what Charlotte looked like?" The little girl's face brightened for the first time since he'd found her, hope flickering in those familiar green eyes like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. She was really pretty. She had hair like mine but longer and the same green eyes. Mama Sarah says I look just like her. She used to sing me lullabies before she got too sick to talk. Mia's expression dimmed again as the memory turned bittersweet. She couldn't talk at the end because the cancer hurt her throat, but she would hum and hold my hand. Cancer, the same disease that had taken Victoria. James felt the universe's cruel sense of irony like a knife twist in his gut. Two sisters, both lost to the same merciless disease, leaving behind people who loved them, and a little girl caught in the crossfire. The parallels were almost too painful to contemplate. Both women dying young, both leaving behind unfinished business and unspoken words. James thought about Victoria's final weeks, how she'd lost her voice toward the end but had still tried to communicate through touch and expression. The image of Charlotte doing the same thing with little Mia, humming lullabies when words failed, painted a picture of love transcending physical limitations that brought tears to his eyes. "Mia, where do you and Mama Sarah live now?" he asked, already knowing the answer would break his heart further. "We have a little apartment on Fisher Street. It's not very big, but Mama Sarah makes it feel like home. She works 2 jobs, cleaning offices at night and watching Mrs. Garcia's baby during the day. But she says it's not enough for the hospital bills." Mia kicked at a small pebble with her worn sneaker, the gesture revealing a frustration that seemed too mature for her years. "I try to help by selling things I find, but grown-ups don't usually want to buy stuff from kids." Fisher Street. James knew that area intimately. It was one of the roughest neighborhoods in the city, where working families struggled to make ends meet, and dreams went to die under the weight of financial reality. He'd driven through it occasionally on his way to business meetings, always insulated by tinted windows and air conditioning from the harsh realities outside. The thought of this precious child, Victoria's flesh and blood, living in poverty while he slept in his empty mansion, was unbearable. The detail about Mia trying to sell things to help with expenses painted a picture of a 6-year-old forced to grow up too fast, shouldering responsibilities that should never fall on a child's shoulders. James could imagine her standing on street corners or approaching strangers, clutching her small treasures and hoping someone would buy them for enough money to make a difference. The courage it must have taken, the rejection she must have faced, the determination to keep trying despite the impossibility of her situation, it all spoke to a strength of character that reminded him painfully of Victoria. "What kind of operation does Mama Sarah need?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer would be both heartbreaking and expensive. "Something about her heart. She gets really tired and sometimes her lips turn blue, and she has to sit down and breathe real hard. Last week she fainted at work and they brought her to the hospital. That's when the doctor told us about the operation." Mia's voice dropped to a whisper, as if speaking the truth too loudly might make it more real. "She doesn't think I know. but I heard her crying on the phone with the money people. They said we have to pay before they'll do the surgery. Heart surgery. $50,000 might as well have been $50 million for a single mother working minimum wage jobs. James felt a familiar rage building, not the calculated anger he used in boardrooms to intimidate competitors, but the pure, protective fury of someone witnessing genuine injustice. The American healthcare system, which he'd never had to worry about thanks to his wealth, was literally holding a woman's life hostage over money that was pocket change to him. The image of Sarah crying on the phone with billing departments, probably late at night after Mia had gone to bed, trying to negotiate payment plans or beg for mercy from institutions that dealt in dollars rather than human dignity, made his stomach turn. This was the kind of systemic cruelty that Victoria had always railed against, the reason she'd insisted their company provide the best health insurance possible for all employees. "Mia, I want to help you and Mama Sarah," he said carefully, his business training warring with his emotional response. "But first I need to understand something. Did Mama Charlotte ever mention her sister Victoria? Did she ever talk about missing someone from her family?" The change in Mia's expression was immediate and profound. Her eyes lit up with recognition and something that looked almost like relief, as if she'd been carrying a secret that was finally safe to share. "Victoria." Yes, she talked about Victoria all the time, especially when she was really sick. She said Victoria was her baby sister and that she loved her so much, but they had a big fight when Victoria went to college and they stopped talking. Tears started flowing again, but these seemed different, less desperate, more cathartic. She used to cry and say she wished she could call Victoria to say sorry, but she was scared Victoria wouldn't want to talk to her anymore. The picture was becoming clearer and more heartbreaking with each revelation. Two sisters who loved each other but were separated by pride and misunderstanding, each carrying regret until their dying days. James could imagine Charlotte lying in a hospital bed, consumed by cancer but even more consumed by regret over the sister she'd lost through stubbornness and fear. Just as he could imagine Victoria, in her final weeks, thinking about the family she'd left behind and wondering if it was too late to bridge the gap that had grown between them. "What did Charlotte tell you about the fight?" James asked gently, needing to understand the full scope of the tragedy that had kept the sisters apart. Mia scrunched up her face in concentration, clearly trying to remember conversations that had happened when she was even younger. "Mama Charlotte said Victoria got really smart and went to a fancy college, and she was proud, but also scared. She said she was scared Victoria would forget about us because we didn't have nice things or know how to talk fancy. And then one day they had a big fight about it, and Victoria said mean things about how Charlotte was trying to hold her back, and Charlotte said mean things about Victoria thinking she was too good for her family." The childish retelling painted a vivid picture of two young women caught between love and insecurity, each striking out at the other's deepest fears. Charlotte, older and protective, probably terrified of losing the sister she'd helped raise. Victoria, ambitious and driven, probably feeling guilty about leaving her family behind, but also resentful of anything that seemed to constrain her dreams. "And after the fight?" James prompted, though he dreaded the answer. "They never talked again," Mia said with the devastating simplicity of childhood truth. "Mama Charlotte said she kept thinking she would call Victoria tomorrow or next week or next year, but she was always too scared. She said sorry was the hardest word in the world to say to someone you love." James felt his heart breaking for both sisters, for all the lost time and unspoken apologies, for the love that had endured despite the silence between them. He thought about Victoria's phone calls that went unanswered, the birthdays and holidays that passed without contact, the gradual hardening of hurt feelings into permanent walls. "Mia, I have something very important to tell you. Victoria was my wife. That makes you and me family." The little girl's mouth fell open, and for a moment she looked so much like Victoria when she was surprised that James had to grip the edge of the headstone to steady himself. The resemblance wasn't just physical. It was the exact expression Victoria made when processing unexpected information, the way her eyes widened and her lips parted slightly before her brilliant mind kicked into gear to analyze the implications. "Your Uncle James?" "Mama Charlotte said Victoria married a man named James who was really smart and kind. She said she hoped someday she'd be brave enough to meet you both. The words tumbled out in a rush of excitement and disbelief. Uncle James. The title hit him like a physical embrace from his late wife. Victoria had talked about him to her sister even during their estrangement. Charlotte had wanted to meet them both, if only she'd been brave enough to reach out. The tragedy of missed opportunities was staggering. If Charlotte had made that call, if Victoria had answered, if either of them had been brave enough to make the first move toward reconciliation, how different all their lives might have been. Yes, sweetheart. I'm Uncle James, and I'm going to make sure Mama Sarah gets her surgery. But I need to be very careful about how we do this, because I need to make sure you and Sarah are really who you say you are. Not because I don't trust you, but because I have to protect both of us. James's business instincts were kicking in alongside his emotional response. In his world, verification was essential. Too many people had tried to take advantage of his wealth over the years, and the stakes here were too high for sentiment to override prudence. But looking at this child who was so clearly Victoria's family, he felt a certainty in his bones that transcended documentation. Mia stared at him with wide eyes that held too much knowledge for a 6-year-old. Are you really rich like Mama Charlotte said? Rich enough to help Mama Sarah? Yes, Mia, I'm that rich. The words felt strange in his mouth. For the first time in 3 years, his wealth felt like a tool for something meaningful rather than just a score in a game he'd already won. Money had become abstract to him after Victoria's death, numbers in accounts that grew larger without bringing any satisfaction or purpose. Now suddenly, it had the potential to save a life and unite a family. But why would you help us? We're almost strangers. The question revealed a wisdom born from hardship that no child should possess. Mia had clearly learned early that help usually came with strings attached, that adults often made promises they didn't keep, that hope could be dangerous for people in desperate situations. James knelt down so they were eye level again, looking into those familiar green eyes that connected him to the love he'd lost. Because family helps family, and because I think Mama Charlotte and my Victoria are somewhere together right now, hoping we'll take care of each other. But Mia, I need you to understand, this is going to take some time. I need to talk to lawyers and doctors and make sure everything is done the right way. For the first time since he'd found her, Mia smiled, a radiant expression that transformed her tear-stained face into something that could have been Victoria at age 6. The smile was so achingly familiar, it took his breath away. I think they'd like that, she said softly. Standing up, James pulled out his phone and scrolled to his assistant's number. In his world of corporate efficiency, Margaret Chen was the woman who made impossible things happen with a few phone calls and the weight of his influence behind her. If anyone could navigate the complex logistics of verifying family relationships and arranging emergency medical care, it was Margaret. Mia, I need to make a phone call, and then we're going to go see Mama Sarah. I want to meet the woman who's been taking such good care of Victoria's niece. As he dialed, James felt something shifting inside his chest, a loosening of the grief that had held him captive for 3 years, not replacing it, but transforming it into something that felt purposeful rather than purely destructive. He wasn't getting Victoria back, but he was getting a chance to honor her memory in a way that mattered. He was getting a family. Margaret, I need you to contact our legal department immediately. I need background checks, family verification, and medical consultations set up for today. I also need Dr. Harrison at Presbyterian Hospital on standby for a cardiac surgery consultation. He paused, looking down at Mia, who was watching him with hope that was almost blinding in its intensity. And Margaret? This is family business. Handle it with absolute priority and discretion. When he hung up, Mia was looking at him with an expression that was part wonder, part disbelief. Is Mama Sarah really going to be okay? She's going to be more than okay, James promised, meaning every word. But it's going to take a few days to arrange everything properly. Can you be patient with me while I make sure we do this right? I can be patient, Mia said solemnly. Mama Sarah taught me that good things are worth waiting for. The morning sun had finally burned away the mist, revealing a clear blue sky that seemed full of possibilities. For the first time since Victoria's death, James Morrison felt hope stirring in his chest, like a long dormant seed finally receiving water. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years it didn't feel empty. The ride to Fisher Street in James's Bentley was surreal. A billionaire and a 6-year-old girl sitting in leather seats that cost more than most people's annual salary, heading into a neighborhood where his car would be worth more than every building on the block combined. Mia pressed her nose against the window, watching the city change from manicured business districts to struggling residential areas with a mixture of excitement and nervousness that spoke to a child who understood the vast differences between worlds. "Uncle James," she said softly, trying out the title like a new piece of clothing that might not fit properly. "What if Mama Sarah doesn't believe you're real? Sometimes when she's really tired, she says she sees things that aren't there." The innocent comment hit James harder than any corporate crisis he'd ever faced. Here was a child who'd learned to doubt miracles because her life had been full of disappointments, who'd witnessed her mother's exhaustion and desperation firsthand. The fact that Mia was worried about Sarah's mental state revealed a maturity that no 6-year-old should need to possess. "Then we'll prove it to her together, sweetheart." Sometimes the best things in life seem too good to be true at first. James tried to inject confidence into his voice, but privately he wondered what kind of reception awaited them. How would a struggling single mother react to a billionaire showing up at her door claiming to be family? In her position, he'd probably assume it was some kind of scam or cruel joke. As they turned onto Fisher Street, James felt his heart sink. The apartment buildings were old and poorly maintained, with fire escapes that looked like they hadn't been inspected in decades and windows that were either boarded up or covered with newspapers for privacy. Broken glass littered the sidewalks, and the few people visible on the street at this early hour looked worn down by lives of constant struggle. This was where Victoria's family had been living, while he'd been drowning his sorrows in a mansion that echoed with loneliness. The contrast was stark and deeply troubling. While James had been isolating himself in luxury, Victoria's niece had been growing up in an environment where safety was uncertain and basic necessities were constant worries. The guilt was almost overwhelming, not rational guilt, since he'd had no way of knowing about Mia's existence, but emotional guilt nonetheless. "That's our building." Mia pointed to a 3-story brick structure that had seen better days sometime in the previous century. Graffiti covered the lower walls, and several windows were cracked or missing entirely, covered with cardboard and tape. "We live on the 2nd floor. Mama Sarah says we're lucky because we have our own bathroom and the heat usually works." Lucky. A 6-year-old child considered herself lucky to have basic plumbing and intermittent heating. James made a mental note to buy the entire building and renovate it properly, not just for Mia and Sarah, but for all the families trying to survive in conditions no one should have to endure. His wealth could transform this entire block, and suddenly he had a purpose for it beyond accumulation. The Bentley's presence on Fisher Street was drawing attention. Curious stares from early morning commuters heading to minimum wage jobs, suspicious looks from residents who'd learned to be wary of anything out of the ordinary. James realized he should have thought about this, should have taken a less conspicuous car. The last thing Sarah needed was neighbors gossiping about mysterious rich visitors. The hallway smelled of cooking spices mixed with dampness and old cigarette smoke, overlaid with the industrial-strength disinfectant that couldn't quite mask years of accumulated odors. James followed Mia up a narrow staircase with a banister that wobbled under his grip, past doors that bore the sounds of multiple families living in spaces too small to contain their struggles and dreams. Televisions blared in multiple languages, babies cried, and he could hear at least one heated argument through thin walls. Each floor told a story of people trying to maintain dignity in difficult circumstances. Door frames were carefully painted, despite peeling in other areas, and he noticed small gardens of plastic flowers and children's artwork taped to some doors, attempts to create beauty in an environment that offered little of it naturally. "Mama Sarah?" "I'm home," Mia called out as she opened the door to apartment 2B with a key she wore on a string around her neck. "And I brought someone special." The apartment was tiny but spotlessly clean, with furniture that had been carefully maintained despite its obvious age. Crocheted doilies covered worn spots on the arms of a second-hand sofa, and children's drawings decorated the refrigerator with tape that had been used and reused until it barely stuck. But what hit James most profoundly was how much love was evident in every corner. From the carefully arranged flowers in a mason jar on the windowsill, to the way every surface had been cleaned until it gleamed. Despite the poverty, This was clearly a home in the truest sense. Family photos in mismatched frames covered one wall, pictures of Charlotte holding baby Mia, Sarah and Mia at what looked like a park or playground, candid shots of daily life filled with genuine smiles and affection. The space was organized with military precision, everything in its place maximizing function in minimal square footage. A small bookshelf held an impressive collection of children's books, clearly purchased second-hand but in good condition. James noticed several educational workbooks and what appeared to be homeschool materials, evidence of Sarah's commitment to Mia's education despite their financial constraints. "Mia, honey, where have you been?" "I was worried sick." The voice came from a small kitchen area, followed by a woman who made James's breath catch in his throat. Sarah Thompson looked like she might have been beautiful once, before years of struggle and worry had carved lines around her eyes and thinned her frame to the point of frailty. She was probably in her early 30s but looked older, with the grayish pallor of someone whose heart wasn't pumping enough oxygen through her system. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore scrubs that suggested she'd either just come from or was preparing to go to one of her jobs. But her eyes, those same concerned, loving eyes that James had seen in so many family photos, were full of fierce protectiveness as she looked at Mia, even as confusion clouded her features when she noticed James. Despite her obvious exhaustion and illness, her first priority was clearly Mia's well-being. "Mia, who is this man? You know you're not supposed to talk to strangers." Despite her weakness, Sarah moved protectively between James and the little girl, proving that love could make even the frailest person formidable. Her voice carried authority despite her physical fragility, and James recognized the tone of someone who'd learned to be vigilant in an environment where danger could come from unexpected sources. "Mama Sarah, this is Uncle James. He was married to Mama Charlotte's sister, Victoria." Mia's excitement was infectious, her words tumbling over each other in her eagerness to share the miraculous news. But Sarah's expression only grew more confused and worried, her protective instincts clearly activated by this unprecedented situation. "Mia, sweetheart, what story are you telling? We don't have any, Uncle James." Sarah's voice was gentle but firm, the tone of someone used to managing a child's overactive imagination, while also being alert to potential threats. Her eyes never left James, cataloging details and assessing danger with the hypervigilance of someone who'd learned to trust carefully. James stepped forward slowly, keeping his hands visible and his voice calm. Years of high-stakes negotiations had taught him how to project trustworthiness, how to de-escalate tension with body language and tone. "Ms. Thompson, my name is James Morrison. I was married to Victoria Reynolds Morrison. I believe Charlotte was her sister, and I'd like to verify that Mia is Charlotte's daughter." Sarah's face went white, and she had to grip the back of a chair to steady herself. The name Morrison clearly meant something to her. Perhaps Charlotte had mentioned it, or perhaps she'd seen it in news articles about successful entrepreneurs. That's not possible. Charlotte said Victoria's husband was some big businessman who wouldn't want anything to do with people like us. The pain in Sarah's voice revealed years of insecurity and self-doubt that broke James's heart. Here was a woman who'd internalized the message that she and Mia weren't worthy of consideration from people of higher social status, that their poverty made them somehow less deserving of family connection. The damage that economic inequality inflicted on people's sense of self-worth was profound and heartbreaking. "Ms. Thompson, may I sit down? I think we need to talk about Charlotte and Victoria, and why they lost touch with each other. But first, I need to be honest with you. I'm going to need to verify everything through proper channels. I hope you understand that this is for everyone's protection." Sarah nodded weakly and gestured to the small sofa, her movements careful and measured in the way of someone managing a serious health condition. As they settled in, Mia cuddled against Sarah's side while James took the opposite end. He noticed how carefully Sarah was breathing, the way she kept one hand pressed against her chest as if willing her heart to keep beating. Her lips had a faint blue tinge that spoke to poor circulation, and he could see the effort it took for her to simply sit upright and participate in this conversation. The medical emergency was clearly more urgent than Mia had understood. Sarah was sicker than a 6-year-old could fully comprehend, and time was running out. The knowledge added urgency to James's mission while also making him grateful he'd found them when he did. "I need to know, James began gently. "What did Charlotte tell you about Victoria?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, studying his face with tired but intelligent eyes. Despite her illness and circumstances, there was sharp intelligence in her gaze, the look of someone who'd learned to read people accurately as a survival skill. Charlotte said Victoria was brilliant and beautiful, and that she married a man who was going to change the world. But she also said, Sarah glanced at Mia and lowered her voice. She said they had a terrible fight when Victoria was in college. Victoria accused Charlotte of holding her back, and Charlotte accused Victoria of forgetting where she came from. They both said things they couldn't take back. The words hit James like physical blows. A fight between sisters, pride and misunderstanding on both sides, leading to years of separation and regret. He could imagine the scene. Two young women caught between love and fear, each striking out at the other's deepest insecurities in the way that only family members could do with such devastating precision. Sarah, I need you to understand something very important. Victoria did mention having a sister once early in our marriage. She said her family was complicated and that she'd lost them through her own mistakes. She never gave me details, but I could see how much it hurt her. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and James could see the relief in her expression at learning that Victoria had carried grief about the separation too. Charlotte died believing Victoria hated her for being poor and uneducated, and I've been telling Mia that her aunt was too rich and successful to care about us. But that wasn't true, James said softly. And I think if we dig deeper, we'll find that neither Charlotte nor Victoria really believed those things. Sometimes people say hurtful things when they're scared of being hurt first. The conversation continued for another hour, with James slowly building trust while gathering the information he needed for verification. Sarah shared photos of Charlotte, stories about her relationship with Victoria, details about Mia's birth and early years. With each revelation, the family connection became more undeniable, and James felt the walls around his heart continuing to crumble. By the time they left for the hospital for Sarah's emergency consultation, James Morrison had gained more than just legal verification of family ties. He'd gained a purpose that had been missing from his life since Victoria's death, and the beginning of understanding that love really could transcend death, finding new ways to express itself through the connections between people who chose to care for each other. The morning had started with him talking to a gravestone. It was ending with him gaining a family, pending verification, and somehow that felt exactly like something Victoria would have orchestrated from beyond the grave. 6 weeks after the DNA tests confirmed what James's heart had already known, life at the Morrison estate had settled into a rhythm that felt both miraculous and surprisingly natural. Sarah's heart surgery had been a complete success, performed by the best cardiac team money could secure, and she was recovering beautifully in the guest house that had become their new home. The facility was larger than most family homes, with its own kitchen, living areas, and bedrooms, giving them privacy while keeping them close to James. The transformation in Sarah's health had been remarkable to witness. The grayish pallor had given way to healthy color in her cheeks, and she no longer struggled for breath during simple conversations. The successful surgery had quite literally given her a new lease on life, and James felt profound satisfaction knowing that his resources had made such a dramatic difference in someone's well-being. "Uncle James, look what I made," Mia called from her seat at the massive oak desk in his home office, where she'd been given permission to do her homework while he worked. She held up a drawing of stick figures under a rainbow, clearly James, herself, Sarah, and what appeared to be a very small fourth figure. The office that had once been his sterile sanctuary of corporate efficiency had been transformed by Mia's presence. Her artwork covered one wall, her school supplies occupied a corner of his desk, and her cheerful chatter had replaced the oppressive silence that had dominated the space for 3 years. The change was profound and welcome, proof that life was meant to be shared rather than endured in isolation. "That's beautiful, sweetheart. Who's the little person?" James asked, though he had a growing suspicion based on the careful way Mia had positioned the smallest figure in the family group. "That's the baby," Mia announced with 6-year-old matter-of-factness that somehow made extraordinary news sound perfectly normal. "Mama Sarah told me yesterday, but she said I had to wait until she talked to you first. But I'm terrible at keeping secrets when they're happy ones." James felt his world tilt slightly on its axis as the implications of her innocent announcement crashed over him. A baby. Sarah was pregnant. His mind immediately raced through the medical implications. Complications after major surgery. The complexity of their newly formed family dynamic. The financial and emotional responsibilities that would come with an infant. But then, looking at Mia's radiant smile and the careful way she'd drawn the new family member into her picture, he realized she saw this as nothing but wonderful news. "Uncle James, you're doing that thinking face again. Are you worried about the baby?" Mia's perceptive question brought him back to the present, reminding him that this incredibly intuitive child had learned to read adult emotions with disturbing accuracy. "I'm not worried, Mia. I'm happy. Really, really happy." And as he said the words, James realized they were true. After 3 years of empty rooms and silence, the prospect of a baby's cry echoing through the halls felt like the sweetest music imaginable. This house had been designed for a family, and finally, it would fulfill its intended purpose. Good. Because I told the baby last night when I put my hand on Mama Sarah's tummy that they're going to be really lucky. They get to have you as a daddy, me as a big sister, and Mama Sarah as the best mama in the world. James felt his throat tighten with emotion at the casual way Mia had assigned him the role of father to Sarah's unborn child. The innocent assumption spoke to how completely she'd accepted him as family, how naturally she'd integrated him into their small unit. "Mia, you know I'm not really your daddy, right? I'm your uncle. Sarah raised you, and she's your mama." Mia tilted her head with the serious expression she wore when considering important matters, her green eyes reflecting a wisdom that sometimes seemed far beyond her years. "But you feel like a daddy. You teach me things and take care of us and make Mama Sarah smile again. So even if you're Uncle James, you're also kind of Daddy James, right?" The simple logic of a 6-year-old cut straight to the heart of what their family had become. James had indeed stepped into a paternal role, not by replacing anyone, but by adding to the love that already existed. He'd found himself attending parent-teacher conferences, helping with homework, and worrying about Mia's happiness in ways that felt both foreign and completely natural. A soft knock interrupted their conversation. Sarah appeared in the doorway looking healthier than she had since James first met her, but with obvious anxiety written across her features. The surgery had restored her physical health, but James could see that she was nervous about sharing her news with him. "James, we need to talk. Privately." Her eyes darted to Mia, who was pretending to color but clearly listening intently to every word with the focused attention of a child who'd learned that adult conversations often contained information that would affect her life. "Mia, why don't you go see if Mrs. Henderson needs help with lunch? I think she mentioned making those chocolate chip cookies you like." James's housekeeper had taken to Mia immediately, treating her like the granddaughter she'd never had, and spoiling her with homemade treats and patient attention. "Okay, but remember, we're all happy about the baby, right?" Mia called over her shoulder as she skipped out of the room, leaving James and Sarah alone with the enormity of their new reality. Sarah sank into the chair across from his desk, her hands unconsciously moving to her still flat stomach in the protective gesture that pregnant women seem to develop instinctively. "James, I need you to know this wasn't planned. The doctors think it happened right before my surgery. Stress and fear can sometimes affect contraception effectiveness, and I was so overwhelmed with everything that was happening. What matters is that it did happen, and I don't know what to do. Sarah, before you say anything else, I want you to know that I'm genuinely happy about this baby. Genuinely." James meant every word. The prospect of new life in their home felt like a gift from Victoria herself, a completion of the family she'd always dreamed they would have. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and James could see the relief in her expression mixed with lingering uncertainty. "But James, you didn't sign up for this. You offered to help Charlotte's daughter and the woman who was caring for her. You didn't sign up to become a father to a newborn at 37. 37 isn't exactly elderly, Sarah. And besides, Victoria and I tried to have children for years before she got sick. This baby..." James paused, choosing his words carefully. "This baby feels like a gift from her." The truth was even more complex than that. He and Victoria had tried for 2 years to conceive, undergoing fertility treatments and consultations that had been emotionally grueling. When the cancer diagnosis came, they'd had to abandon those dreams, focusing instead on fighting for Victoria's life. The loss of their potential children had been one of many griefs wrapped up in losing his wife. But what about the father? Sarah's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, and James could see shame and fear warring in her expression. James felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He'd assumed that Sarah's partner had died like Charlotte. The realization that there was another man involved, someone who might have legal rights or could complicate their family situation, introduced a new variable into an already complex equation. "Tell me about him." Sarah's face crumpled with shame and fear, and James could see how difficult this confession was for her. "His name is Marcus Webb. He was someone I met during the darkest time, when I was terrified about my heart condition and exhausted from trying to keep us afloat financially. It was one night, James. One night when I felt so alone and scared that I made a terrible decision." The pain in her voice was devastating. Here was a woman who had given everything to raise someone else's child, who had worked herself nearly to death trying to provide, who had made one very human mistake during the most frightening period of her life. James felt a surge of protective anger, not at Sarah, but at the circumstances that had left her so vulnerable. "What kind of man is he, Sarah?" "Not a good one," Sarah said immediately, and James could hear the fear underneath her words. "When I told him about the pregnancy 3 weeks ago, he demanded I take care of it and said horrible things when I refused. He works security at a building where I used to clean, and he's connected to people who do bad things. When I told him I was keeping the baby, he threatened to cause problems for us." The protective rage that surged through James was unlike anything he'd ever experienced in the corporate world. Someone had threatened his family, and make no mistake, Sarah and Mia were his family now, and that someone was about to learn what happened when you crossed a billionaire with unlimited resources and a protective instinct. In the business world, James had always operated with calculated precision, using his wealth and influence as tools to achieve specific objectives. But this was different. This was personal in a way that made his usual measured approach seem inadequate. Marcus Webb had threatened the people James loved, and that was unforgivable. "Sarah, I need his full name and any information you have about him." "James, no. I don't want you getting involved in something dangerous. You've done enough for us already." Sarah's voice carried genuine fear, not just for herself, but for James. Even in her vulnerable state, she was trying to protect him from potential consequences. "His name, Sarah." James's voice carried the steel that had built a corporate empire, the tone that had intimidated competitors and closed billion-dollar deals. "No one threatens my family. Ever." Sarah studied his face and seemed to recognize that this was not a battle she would win. The transformation in James's demeanor was unmistakable. The gentle, caring man who read bedtime stories to Mia had been replaced by someone who wielded power with devastating efficiency. "Marcus Webb. He works at the Meridian building downtown. James, he's not just mean, he's involved with people who do illegal things. I've heard rumors about drugs, about violence. I'm scared of what he might do if he thinks we're trying to cause trouble for him." Marcus Webb. James was already mentally composing calls to his head of security, his legal team, and several other resources that Marcus Webb couldn't even imagine existed. By tomorrow morning, they would know everything about Marcus Webb, from his kindergarten report cards to his most recent financial transactions. And by the end of the week, Marcus Webb would find himself facing consequences he never saw coming. "Sarah, I want you to understand something very clearly. Marcus Webb is never going to be a problem for you or this baby again. I promise you that. What are you going to do?" There was something in Sarah's voice that suggested she was beginning to understand the full scope of James's capabilities, the resources he could bring to bear when protecting people he cared about. "Whatever is necessary to protect my family. Legally, completely above board, but definitively." James's smile carried none of his usual warmth, instead reflecting the cold calculation that had made him successful in business. "Sarah, you have to understand something about my world. I don't just have money. I have influence, connections, and resources that can solve problems like Marcus Webb, without him ever knowing what hit him." The truth was that James had spent years building a network of relationships that extended far beyond the business world. Politicians, law enforcement officials, judges, prosecutors, all owed him favors or relied on his support. Marcus Webb, a small-time criminal who'd made the mistake of threatening James's family, was about to discover what it meant to have the full weight of that network focused against him. Sarah stared at him for a long moment, and James could see her processing this revelation about his true capabilities. "You really consider this baby your family, don't you? Even though it's not biologically yours? Even though you barely know me?" "Sarah, 6 weeks ago I was a broken man who spent his mornings talking to a gravestone, counting the days until grief finally claimed me. Today I'm planning to convert the spare bedroom into a nursery and thinking about what kind of playground equipment to install in the backyard." James's voice grew thick with emotion as he spoke. "You and Mia didn't just save my sanity, you saved my soul. This baby is part of that miracle. And when it comes, and you're dealing with sleepless nights and crying and all the chaos that comes with an infant?" Sarah's question revealed lingering doubts about whether James truly understood what he was committing to. James thought about his empty mansion, about the nursery he and Victoria had started planning before the cancer diagnosis, about dreams that had died with his wife and were now being reborn in unexpected ways. "Sarah, Victoria, and I tried for 2 years to have a baby. When she got sick, we had to stop trying, and it became one of our biggest regrets. This baby feels like Victoria's way of giving me the family we never got to have." Sarah was crying openly now, tears of relief and gratitude streaming down her face. "How are you even real? How did Mia stumble across the one person in the world who would see a struggling single mother and her baggage as a blessing? Because sometimes," James said gently, "the universe gets tired of watching good people suffer and decides to write a better ending." A crash from the kitchen, followed by Mia's guilty, "Sorry, Mrs. Henderson," interrupted their emotional moment, reminding them both that their family included a 6-year-old who was probably covered in flour and cookie dough. "We should probably go check on your daughter before she destroys my kitchen," James said, standing and offering Sarah his hand. "Our daughter," Sarah corrected softly, "who's about to become a big sister." "Our daughter," James agreed, "who's about to become a big sister to our baby." As they walked toward the sounds of Mia's enthusiastic helping in the kitchen, James felt the final pieces of his new life clicking into place. Tomorrow he would deal with Marcus Webb through channels that would ensure the man never posed a threat to anyone again. Next week he would start converting the spare bedroom into a nursery. But right now he was going to watch his 6-year-old daughter explain to his housekeeper why cookie dough was somehow on the ceiling, and probably volunteer to help clean it up. For the first time in 3 years, James Morrison's life was delightfully, chaotically, perfectly full. 3 months later, James stood in the completed nursery watching Mia carefully arrange stuffed animals in what she called welcome committee formation. At 6 months pregnant, Sarah glowed with health and happiness, her recovery from heart surgery complete and her pregnancy progressing beautifully under the care of the best medical team money could provide. The baby was thriving, Mia was excelling in her new private school, and their family had settled into a rhythm that felt both surreal and perfectly natural. What made it even more satisfying was the complete absence of Marcus Webb from their lives. James smiled, remembering the morning 2 months ago when his head of security had delivered the news that Webb had accepted a generous employment opportunity, working on an oil rig in Alaska. A 3-year contract with excellent pay and no opportunity for early termination. The fact that Webb's criminal associates had simultaneously found themselves under intense scrutiny from various law enforcement agencies was purely coincidental, as was the sudden audit of Webb's finances that had revealed several interesting tax discrepancies. The operation had been surgical in its precision. James's investigators had uncovered Webb's involvement in a drug distribution network, his history of domestic violence, and his connections to several unsolved burglaries in the area where Sarah had worked. Armed with this information, James's legal team had worked with prosecutors to build cases that would keep Webb and his associates occupied for years. The Alaska job offer had been presented as an alternative to facing immediate arrest, and Webb had been smart enough to take it. Sometimes justice looked like a courtroom. Sometimes it looked like making sure dangerous people found themselves in very remote places where they couldn't hurt innocent families. Uncle James, I think the teddy bear should be closest to the crib because bears are protective, and then the elephant because they never forget people they love, and then the lion because they're brave like our baby will be. Mia's careful reasoning for her stuffed animal security detail had become part of their daily routine. The nursery itself was a masterpiece of preparation and love. James had hired the best interior designers but insisted that every decision be made with input from Mia and Sarah. The result was a space that felt both luxurious and warmly personal, with hand-painted murals depicting scenes from children's storybooks and custom furniture designed to grow with the child. That sounds perfect, sweetheart. You're going to be the best big sister ever. I've been practicing with my baby doll, want to see? Mia picked up the realistic infant doll that Sarah had bought her and demonstrated her gentle rocking technique. See? I support the head just like Mama Sarah taught me, and I sing the same songs Mama Charlotte used to sing to me, even though I don't remember them very well. Watching the 6-year-old prepare so seriously for her new role, James felt overwhelmed by how far they'd all come. The scared, desperate child he'd found in the cemetery had blossomed into a confident, loving little girl who considered herself lucky rather than burdened by life's changes. Her transformation was proof of what stability and unconditional love could accomplish. The private school James had enrolled her in had initially been concerned about Mia's adjustment, given her background of poverty and trauma. But she'd exceeded every expectation, demonstrating not only intelligence but emotional resilience that impressed her teachers. She'd made friends easily, embraced new challenges with enthusiasm, and shown none of the behavioral problems that might have been expected from a child who'd experienced such dramatic life changes. Mia, can I ask you something important? Sure. I love when you ask me important things because you always listen to my answers like they matter. This simple statement never failed to touch James deeply. In his corporate world, people often agreed with him because of his wealth and power. With Mia, he'd learned the joy of being valued for his attention and care rather than his resources. Do you ever miss the old life? Before we became a family? Mia's expression grew thoughtful as she climbed onto his lap, a liberty she'd taken with increasing frequency as their bond deepened. I miss some things. I miss the apartment sometimes because it was just me and Mama Sarah and it felt cozy. And I miss thinking Mama Charlotte could see me better when we lived closer to the cemetery. James felt a pang of guilt at her words. In providing material comfort, had he somehow diminished her connection to her deceased mother? Do you want to visit her grave more often? We can do that. No, Uncle James, I figured out that Mama Charlotte can see me everywhere, not just at the cemetery. And besides, Mia's voice grew matter-of-fact, I think she likes seeing me happy better than seeing me sad and scared all the time. The wisdom of children never ceased to amaze him. Mia had processed her grief and their family changes with an emotional intelligence that many adults never developed. What about now? Are you happy now? I'm really happy. Sometimes I wake up and for a second I think I'm back in the old apartment with Mama Sarah sick and worried about money. But then I remember that this is real, and we're safe, and the baby is coming. And you teach me about computers and business and how to be strong like Mama Charlotte was. Her words painted a picture of a child who still carried some trauma, but had developed healthy coping mechanisms. James had insisted on therapy for both Mia and Sarah during their transition, understanding that emotional healing was just as important as physical and financial security. A commotion from downstairs interrupted their quiet moment. Voices, footsteps, and what sounded like Sarah calling his name with unusual excitement. James, come quick. Both of you. Sarah's voice carried up the stairs with an emotion that made them both immediately alert. They hurried downstairs to find Sarah standing in the foyer holding an overnight delivery envelope, her face flushed with emotion, and something that looked like wonder. Mrs. Henderson hovered nearby, clearly invested in whatever drama was unfolding. What is it? James asked, taking in Sarah's expression of barely contained excitement. It's from the law firm handling Charlotte's estate. They've been going through her personal effects and they found something. Sarah's hands were shaking as she held out a small wrapped package. James, they found a journal. Charlotte's journal from the last year of her life. James felt his heart skip a beat. Unlike letters that might have been written but never sent, a journal would contain Charlotte's private thoughts, her true feelings about Victoria and their estrangement. "Are you sure we should read it?" "I think we need to," Sarah said firmly. "I think Victoria and Charlotte would want us to understand what really happened, so we can make sure our children never experience that kind of loss." Mia, who had been listening with the intense concentration she brought to all adult conversations, spoke up. "If it's Mama Charlotte's journal, maybe it will help me remember more about her. I want to tell the baby about their grandmother." They settled in the living room, Sarah on the couch with Mia cuddled against her pregnant belly, James in his favorite armchair, Mrs. Henderson discreetly nearby with tissues and tea. The afternoon sun streamed through windows that looked out on gardens where Mia played every day, where their new baby would take first steps, where a family was growing in ways none of them had imagined possible. James opened the package with careful reverence and pulled out a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with Charlotte's careful handwriting. The entries spanned the final year of her life, documenting her illness, her fears about Mia's future, and her ongoing regret about Victoria. "Should I read from the beginning?" James asked, though he could see the answer in their expectant faces. "Please," Sarah whispered. "January 15th, James began. "The doctors confirmed today that the cancer has spread. I have perhaps 6 months, maybe less. My biggest fear isn't dying. It's leaving Mia without anyone to love her the way she deserves. Sarah tries to hide it, but I know she's scared too. We're not legally married, so if something happens to me, she'll have no automatic rights to keep Mia. I need to make arrangements, but I also need to find a way to reach out to Victoria. Mia deserves to know her aunt." The words hit the room like a physical presence, Charlotte's voice speaking across time about love and loss and the complicated nature of family. "February 3rd, James continued. "I tried to call Victoria today. I found her number online and sat by the phone for 2 hours, but I couldn't bring myself to dial. What would I say? 'Hi, sister, I know we haven't spoken in 15 years, but I'm dying and I want you to meet your niece?' The pride that kept us apart all these years feels stupid now, but I don't know how to get past it." Sarah was crying softly and Mia was listening with rapt attention, absorbing every detail about the mother she'd lost too young. March 20th. "Mia asked me today why she doesn't have grandparents like other kids. I told her about Victoria, about how smart and beautiful her aunt is, about how proud I am of everything she's accomplished. But I also had to tell her that sometimes families break apart and don't know how to fix themselves. She asked if Victoria knows about her, and I had to say no. The shame of that admission almost killed me." James paused, overwhelmed by the emotion in Charlotte's words. Victoria had died never knowing she had a niece, and Charlotte had died believing her sister wouldn't want to know. April 10th, Sarah and I made it legal today. We drove to the courthouse and got married just in case. If something happens to me, at least Mia will have some protection. I wish I could have had a real wedding, with Victoria there as my maid of honor like I always dreamed when we were kids. I wish a lot of things." The revelation that Charlotte and Sarah had been married hit James with unexpected force. In his focus on establishing guardianship and legal protections for Mia, he'd never thought to ask about the legal status of Sarah and Charlotte's relationship. Sarah was not just Mia's caregiver. She was her stepmother, with all the legal rights that entailed. "There are more entries," Sarah said quietly, "but I think you can see the pattern. Charlotte never stopped loving Victoria, and she never stopped regretting their estrangement. She died hoping that somehow, someday, Victoria would find out about Mia and want to be part of her life." Mia looked up from her spot against Sarah's side, her green eyes serious and thoughtful. "So Mama Charlotte wanted Victoria to know about me?" "More than anything in the world," Sarah confirmed. "And Uncle James, Victoria would have wanted to know about me too?" James felt tears building in his eyes as he looked at this precious child who carried both sisters' faces and strength. "Mia, if Victoria had known about you, she would have moved heaven and earth to be part of your life. Then I think Mama Charlotte and Victoria are happy now," Mia said with the simple wisdom of childhood. "Because we found each other anyway, and now we're a family, and soon the baby will be here, and nobody has to be sad or alone anymore." Looking at this wise 6-year-old who carried both sisters' hopes and dreams, James felt the truth of her words settle into his heart. Charlotte and Victoria had never reconciled in life, but somehow they had orchestrated something even more beautiful. A family built from the pieces of their broken hearts, love that transcended death and transformed grief into joy. As the afternoon sun painted their living room in golden light, James Morrison looked around at his family. Sarah growing rounder with new life, Mia preparing for her role as big sister with characteristic determination, Mrs. Henderson pretending she wasn't crying into her tea, and felt Victoria's presence stronger than he had since her death. The sisters had never spoken again after their fight, but somehow their love had created something lasting anyway. Through loss and separation, and the simple miracle of showing up exactly when needed most, they had built a family that would honor both their memories and create new hope for the future. Sometimes the most important conversations happened without words. Sometimes love expressed itself not through reconciliation, but through lives transformed, families created, and hearts healed by the willingness to choose love over fear, hope over despair, and connection over isolation. The first cry of Emma Charlotte Morrison at 2:23 a.m. on a snowy December morning filled the hospital room with a sound that James thought might be the most beautiful music he'd ever heard. After 14 hours of labor, Sarah held their daughter, and she was their daughter in every way that mattered, against her chest, while Mia stood on a step stool beside the bed, gently stroking the baby's tiny hand with the reverence of someone meeting a long-awaited miracle. "She's so perfect," Mia whispered in awe, her voice filled with the wonder that only children could bring to life's most profound moments. "And look, Uncle James, she has the green eyes. She really is family." "Doctor?" Richardson smiled as she completed her examination, her experienced hands gentle but thorough as she assessed the newest member of the Morrison family. "Both mother and baby are absolutely perfect. Sarah, your heart handled the delivery beautifully. This little one is healthy, strong, and clearly eager to meet her family." James felt tears streaming down his face as he looked at the three most important people in his world. 9 months ago, he'd been a broken man counting down the days until grief finally claimed him. Now he was watching his 6-year-old daughter meet her baby sister, while their mother glowed with the exhaustion and joy of new motherhood. The hospital room felt like a sanctuary, filled with the soft sounds of a family beginning anew. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white and creating a sense of peaceful isolation from everything beyond these walls. In this moment, nothing existed except the miracle of new life and the love that surrounded it. "James," Sarah said softly, extending the baby toward him with the trust of someone who knew he would protect this precious life with everything he had. "Would you like to hold your daughter?" The word daughter hit him like a warm embrace from Victoria herself. When they'd discussed names during the pregnancy, Sarah had insisted that Emma carry both their grandmothers' names. Emma for James's maternal grandmother, Charlotte for the sister who'd brought them all together through love and loss. "I don't want to hurt her," he said, his hands shaking as he reached for the tiny bundle. The businessman who'd commanded boardrooms and negotiated billion-dollar deals was suddenly uncertain about holding a 7-pound baby. "You won't," Sarah assured him, her voice warm with confidence. "She's tougher than she looks. Gets that from her mama and her big sister." The moment Emma settled into his arms, James felt something click into place in his chest that he'd thought was permanently broken. This was what Victoria had dreamed of when she'd talked about their future children during the early years of their marriage. This overwhelming love, this fierce protectiveness, this certainty that he would move mountains to keep this tiny person safe and happy. "Hi, Emma," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm your daddy. I know that might sound strange since we just met, but I've been waiting for you my whole life." Emma's eyes opened, and James swore she looked directly at him with an expression that seemed impossibly wise for someone who'd been breathing for less than an hour. In those green eyes, he could see Victoria, Charlotte, and Mia, a continuation of a family line that had nearly been broken but had found a way to endure. "I think she knows you," Mia said sagely, her 6-year-old certainty about the mysterious connections between people never failing to amaze the adults around her. "Babies are smart like that, and I think Mama Charlotte and Victoria helped pick her out special for our family." Over the next few days, as they settled into life with a newborn, James found himself marveling at how naturally the pieces of their unconventional family fit together. Sarah proved to be an intuitive mother, whose heart condition posed no obstacles to caring for Emma. The surgery had not only saved her life, but had given her the strength to embrace this new chapter fully. Mia embraced her role as big sister with characteristic seriousness, appointing herself Emma's personal guardian and entertainment committee. She would sit by the crib for hours telling Emma stories about their family, about Mama Charlotte who was watching from heaven, and about all the adventures they would have together when Emma was old enough to walk and talk. Mrs. Henderson had transformed into an unofficial grandmother, arriving each morning with homemade meals and an inexhaustible supply of baby-related wisdom gleaned from raising her own 5 children decades earlier. The older woman had become an integral part of their family structure, bridging the gap between formal employee and beloved family member with grace and genuine affection. "Mr. James," she said one morning as he attempted to change Emma's diaper while Mia provided running commentary on his technique. "I've worked for you for 8 years, and I've never seen you look like this." "Like what?" James asked, wrestling with tiny arms that seemed determined to interfere with the diaper-changing process. Fatherhood, he was discovering, involved skills that no business school had prepared him for. "Happy," Mrs. Henderson said simply. "Really, truly happy. Mrs. Victoria would be so pleased to see her family taking such good care of each other." The mention of Victoria no longer brought the sharp stab of grief it once had. Instead, James felt her presence in the laughter that filled rooms that had been silent too long, in the way Emma's tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb with perfect trust, in Mia's daily reports about what she'd taught the baby during their one-sided conversations. Victoria was part of their family in ways that transcended physical presence. Her love for James had opened his heart to loving Sarah and Mia. Her regret about losing Charlotte had motivated his determination to build something lasting from the pieces of broken relationships. Her dreams of children had been fulfilled through Emma's birth. 3 weeks after Emma's birth, James found himself back in Evergreen Cemetery for the first time since that life-changing morning 8 months earlier. But this time, he wasn't alone. He carried Emma in a carrier against his chest while Mia walked beside him, holding a small bouquet of daisies, Emma's birth announcement photos, and a letter Mia had dictated for her angel aunts. The cemetery looked different now, less like a place of endings and more like a bridge between past and present. The headstones no longer seemed like monuments to loss, but rather markers of lives that continued to influence the world through the love they'd created and shared. "Hi, Victoria," he said, settling on the blanket he'd spread beside her headstone. The marble was cold under his hand, but the presence he felt was warm and welcoming. "I brought someone I want you to meet." He placed the photos against the marble, images of Sarah holding Emma, of Mia's proud big sister face, of their family complete and happy and whole. The pictures told the story of dreams fulfilled and love multiplied, of a family that had grown from tragedy into something beautiful. "Her name is Emma Charlotte Morrison, and she's perfect. She has the Reynolds green eyes, and Mia swears she smiled at her on day 3, which the doctors say is impossible, but which we choose to believe anyway." James's voice was steady, filled with joy, rather than the grief that had characterized his previous visits. "Sarah is incredible, Vic. She's strong like Charlotte was, loving like you were, and she's raised Mia to be this amazing little person who sees magic in everything. I think you two would have been best friends." A warm breeze rustled the leaves overhead despite the December cold, and James chose to interpret it as approval. Nature itself seemed to be acknowledging this moment of connection between past and present. "I understand now why you and Charlotte never reconciled. It wasn't about pride or stubbornness. It was about fear. You were both so afraid of being hurt again that you convinced yourselves the other person didn't want to reconnect. But Vic, look what your love created anyway." James pulled out Mia's letter and began reading aloud. "Dear Aunt Victoria and Mama Charlotte, this is Mia, and I want you to meet baby Emma. She's really little, but already really smart, just like you both were. Uncle James says you're watching over us from heaven, and I want you to know that we're all happy now. We laugh a lot and hug a lot, and Mrs. Henderson makes really good cookies. I think you would love our family. We take care of each other just like you would want us to. Love your family on Earth, Leon. Setting the letter beside the photos, James felt a peace settle over him that completed a journey he hadn't even realized he was taking. I think this is probably my last visit, Vic. Not because I love you any less, but because I can feel you everywhere now. In Mia's determination, in Sarah's strength, in Emma's peaceful contentment, in the love that fills every corner of our home. As he packed up the small memorial and prepared to return home to his family, James realized he'd learned something profound about love and loss and the unexpected ways that hearts could heal. Victoria's death had felt like an ending, but it had actually been a transformation. Her love hadn't disappeared, it had simply found new expressions. "Thank you," he whispered to the headstone. "Thank you for leading me to them, and thank you for showing me that the best stories don't end with happily ever after. They end with happily ever continuing." Driving home through the city streets with Emma sleeping peacefully in her car seat and Mia chattering about the playground they'd visit when her sister was older, James Morrison felt the profound satisfaction of a man who had discovered his life's true purpose. He'd built a tech empire that would outlast him, amassed wealth that could change industries, wielded influence that shaped markets. But his greatest achievement was sleeping in a crib he'd assembled himself, learning to navigate the world in a home where love was the most valuable currency, growing up in a family where second chances and unexpected miracles were simply part of the everyday magic. The house that greeted them was no longer the empty mansion he'd rattled around in for 3 years. Lights blazed in windows that had been dark, toys scattered across floors that had been pristine, and the sounds of life. Sarah humming in the kitchen, Mrs. Henderson preparing dinner, Emma's soft breathing, created a symphony of belonging that Victoria herself couldn't have orchestrated more perfectly. That evening, as he sat in the rocking chair holding Emma while Mia read a story to Sarah, who was already back to her normal activities thanks to excellent post-surgery care, James felt Victoria's presence like a warm embrace around all of them. The 6-year-old's voice carried through the room as she read about brave princesses and magical kingdoms, occasionally stopping to explain plot points to baby Emma, who listened with the serious attention that newborns seem to give to their siblings' voices. Sarah smiled from her spot on the couch, her hand resting on her flat stomach in wonder at how quickly her body had healed and adapted to no longer carrying their daughter. "Uncle James," Mia said suddenly, pausing in her reading, "do you think Emma will remember this when she's older? Will she remember that we read to her when she was little?" "I think she'll remember the love," James replied softly, adjusting Emma's blanket as she slept in his arms. "Maybe not the specific stories, but she'll remember feeling safe and loved and wanted." "Good," Mia said with satisfaction, "because I want her to always know that she's the most wanted baby in the whole world." The simple statement encapsulated everything their family had become, a place where people were valued not for what they could provide or accomplish, but simply for existing. Emma would grow up never doubting her place in the world, never wondering if she was loved, never feeling the uncertainty that had marked both Mia's and Sarah's early lives. Somewhere, James knew, 2 sisters were finally reunited, watching over the family their love had created from loss and loneliness, and the simple miracle of being in the right place at exactly the right time. The secret at the grave hadn't been about hidden identities or lost fortunes or dramatic revelations. It had been about the enduring power of love to transform grief into joy, strangers into family, and broken hearts into something even stronger than what had been lost. Charlotte's journal had revealed her deepest wish, that somehow Victoria would find Mia and love her. Victoria's unspoken regret about her lost family had created a heart open enough to embrace Sarah and Mia when they appeared. The sisters had never reconciled in life, but they had collaborated from beyond death to create something more beautiful than either could have imagined alone. In the end, that was the only secret that really mattered. As snow began to fall outside the windows of their warm, love-filled home, James Morrison rocked his daughter to sleep and whispered the same promise he'd made to Victoria on their wedding day, to Mia in the cemetery that first morning, and to Sarah in her tiny apartment when everything changed. "I will love you forever, protect you always, and make sure you know every single day how precious you are to this world." Some promises, he'd learned, were meant to be kept across lifetimes, passed from one generation to the next like the most valuable inheritance anyone could ever receive. Emma would grow up hearing those words, and someday she would whisper them to her own children, continuing a chain of love that began with two sisters who lost each other, but whose love found a way to endure. Love, it turned out, really was the only thing that mattered. Everything else was just details. The Morrison family had found their happily ever continuing, and it was more beautiful than any fairy tale ending could have been.